What's up, everybody? It's Mark from Lawn Creeps Limited, out here in Villa Park, Illinois.
The Garden Village.
And I got a little question for you. Do you have dirt or do you have soil? If you don't have the proper microbiology underneath that grass, then you've got dirt. We got to get that biology in our soil to be able to support our plants. Turf grass, a perennial, a shrub, a tree, anything that grows out of the ground via a root system is dependent on soil biology. Having the right biology in our soil is going to provide us three things: structure, nutrient cycling, disease, and pest suppression. All right, the last episode we talked about the soil structure piece, and in this episode we are going to go ahead and talk about the nutrient cycling piece. Before we actually delve deep into that nutrient cycling piece of it, let's talk about how we get that proper balance, that proper diversity of microbiology. How do we get the entire soil food web in our soils? It's not only what we do, it's what we don't do. I mentioned that last time. We have to do the right things and put the right things in our soil to grow and continue to maintain that diversity and balance of that soil microbiology. We have to create the conditions in that soil for the beneficial bacteria and fungi. We can never let our soils go anaerobic, because that is when the disease-causing organisms start multiplying in numbers, all of the anaerobic
Bad guys.
But for now, let's just talk about what is going on in that root zone, started by that plant with the photosynthesis and kind of how this natural nutrient cycling works. Photosynthesis, that's something we all remember hearing in 7th grade, 8th grade, high school. So we're kind of familiar with what that's all about. What maybe the average person doesn't know is that also through photosynthesis, there are things happening in that soil that is creating a synergy between the microorganisms and that plant by releasing exudates out of its roots from that photosynthesis process. Exudates are sugars, carbohydrates, proteins released out of those roots. Silphium perfoliatum, good old cup plant. This sucker grows about, 12 feet tall up in the air. Some of it's still popping. Sorry, not going to make this into a botany lesson, but I'm going to use this as an example here. So if this cup plant needed more iron, it is going to release out of its roots a certain exudate that is going to call on the certain bacteria that is going to go and get that iron out of the earth in exchange for those exudates. All of those nutrients are immobilized. They are held in that bacterial and fungal biomass. But as those nutrients are tied up in that bacteria and fungi, they are not available to that plant at that point. So essentially, they are like little tiny bags of fertilizer. So what does Mother Nature do? She creates another set of microorganisms, the next players in that food web. Then the higher level predators, the next players in that soil food web, nematodes and protozoa, are like the broadcast spreaders. They are the ones that actually take those nutrients after eating the bacteria and fungi and kind of disperse it right inside that root zone in a soluble plant available form. How incredible is that the plant is in control of that? The plant supports that soil food web, and the soil food web supports that plant. The nutrients it needs in the exact amount that it requires at the exact time that it needs it. It sends out those exudates to begin the process. There is no soil on this earth that lacks the nutrients to grow a healthy plant. You don't see anybody fertilizing a forest. All those little creatures down in that soil are just looking to get some carbon. They're just looking to get some food, and then they become food for other microorganisms looking for food. So it's kind of an eat and be eaten world down there. The bacteria and fungi are pretty much the very beginnings of our soil food web and everything that is key that is going on down there. And God knows, as lawn enthusiasts, we got to have that deep green all the time. So there may be a little bit more input on our end, and that's where we, as the top of that soil food web, come into play as far as how do we want to go about getting that nitrogen in our soil. What is the methodology we want to use? Organic, synthetic, spoon feeding, liquid, granular, this, that, the other. That's obviously a story for another time. Anytime we use a chemical fertilizer, about 20% of it is actually absorbed by the roots in that rhizosphere, but the rest of it sort of just kind of keeps moving through that soil down into our water table. That's not so when we garden or lawn care with that soil food web, and we count on that microbiology for the natural nutrient cycling, in which, again, all of those nutrients are immobilized in that biomass until that bacteria or fungi is eaten by a nematode or a protozoa and released in plant available form right inside the rhizosphere, the root zone. Key bacterial and fungal relationships don't form when a plant can get free food. When that grass is fed chemically, all of those little grass plants bypass that microbial assisted method of obtaining nutrients, and the microbiology kind of adjusts accordingly, so your balances and your diversity is off. And then you're not going to have the three key things I mentioned before. You're not going to have the proper structure, you're not going to have the nutrient cycling that we're talking about here, and you're not going to have the ability to ward off pests and diseases on its own, because you're not going to have that army of beneficial bacteria and fungi and other microorganisms building castle walls around that root zone. When you're kind of giving that plant free food and you're kind of altering the natural way of things, then you have to just continually use these fertilizers. It's just going to require more and more synthetic chemicals. And then the grass is going to be not a true, strong, healthy grass. So you're going to have to go out and reach for those fungicides and pesticides and herbicides. And then the more of these toxic chemicals you put down in that soil, the more it's just detrimental and really starts that vicious circle spinning. And that's, again, that's not very sustainable, because once we start putting all of this stuff down, you know, we are starting to chase away these key players of our soil food web, one of which is earthworms. And in terms of that nutrient cycling, earthworms do a lot because they're moving a lot of that organic matter through the soil, and they're moving a lot of those bacteria and fungi where they need to be. All of those salt-based fertilizers are highly irritable to these worms. If the worms move out, pack their bags, that's a great loss. We got to have earthworms in our soil. They are major shredders of organic material. They pull organic material into that soil and they shred it. They also move aggregates around on their bodies. They're transporting humic materials in other areas of that soil for other soil food web members to utilize. While those worms are moving around in that soil looking for the food, looking for the material, you know, they're creating passageways in that soil for air and water. I get it that sometimes worm castings can become a problem for people, but that is nothing compared to the positive aspects of what earthworms do in our soil. That's a video for another time. It's October 9th. And this lawn has given back to me. It says it right now, I'm listening, and it's saying, Mark, thank you. Thank you for letting me do my thing. Thanks for not over-operating on me and putting all of this toxic stuff down into me, and letting me kind of work with all of those little micro creatures down in that soil that supports me. So now, look what I've done. I've given you this. This is me. Let me show you what I got. And you know what? There ain't no stripes in here. Maybe there's some faint stripes. I've said it before. If that's your thing, God bless you. I'm with you, man. I'm with you. Stripes are a nice frame. It frames it up. I get it. But I don't care about the stripes. I care about everything that is going on underneath this grass, that entire universe under here, ecosystem, and the way this all works together. It's incredible, man, that soil food web. So a quick recap here. Nutrient retention. When we've got that biology in our soil, we are keeping those nutrients in that root zone where it needs to be. The highest concentration of bacteria and fungi are right around that root zone. Go figure, right? With the processes that are happening with the exudates and the plant calling on that biology, wake up and grow that bacteria, fungi to get the nutrients it needs to pull it out of that parent material, bring it back to the plant in exchange for those exudates. All of that is pretty much mainly going around in that root zone. Studies have shown that this bacteria and fungi and all of that stuff can go down as far as like a handful of miles. But all of that activity is right there in the root zone. So whatever nutrients we're inputting into our lawn as well from organic material, plus the sloughed off root tips and just natural organic material, decomposing grass clippings and stuff like that these micro creatures have to work with. It's being held in the bodies of all of those little micro creatures. So your nutrient retention is there. As far as the nutrient cycling piece, it starts with the plant, exudates, the plant needs something, it calls on its microbiology. It has that symbiotic relationship, right? And then that next set of food web predators come and meal on them. The amount of nutrients that are held in the bodies of this bacteria and fungi are in a much higher concentration than what the next members need. So there's excess there that gets, released as waste. And then that's when it becomes plant available. And there you're starting to see where this whole kind of cycle is starting to work, this whole nutrient cycling piece. And that's why you have to have the proper sets, the proper diversity, and the right biology, present to do all of that. Got all of these guys, basically vying for that food and kind of like keeping each other in check, because that's where, again, that food web comes into play in that cycling. The micro macro arthropods meal on those protozoa nematodes that mealed on the bacteria and fungi, all the while releasing the excess and the organic material. They're releasing the minerals that are held in the bodies of the previous member. But they are keeping their populations in check as well, because if you've got too much of one member, that's where things get out of whack, and then some things can happen. And we see that in our plants, we see that in our grass. Maybe that's why we see some leaf spotting and brown patch and stuff during humid days and whatnot. Humid days, the weather plays a part in this thing. When the weather's conducive to those kinds of diseases and pests, maybe those good guys do lose their grip for a minute. A hockey game, right? A hockey game, sometimes it's 1-0, and then it's 2-0, but then the other team scores, it's 2-1, and then the last couple seconds of the second period, man, they tie it up. You're like, yes. And then the third period, they come back, they battle the whole damn game, and then boom, they finally get that winning goal, man. Someone scores a goal at the last second, and the good guys win. That's the same thing with your grass, man. Sometimes you have to stand pat and let it do its thing and see what happens, but do all the right things that are going to allow that to happen. Like, hey, you know what? I do all these awesome things. I know I've got a healthy grass. When this grass is healthy, it looks like a gem. And, I've seen what this grass can do with, this much input from me. So let's just kind of see what happens here. And you're a steward that knows when to kind of stand pat and when to do something. You got to be a nimble gardener. But, there's also, maybe some of these organisms die themselves and they become food themselves. You throw the other players in the mix. The micro macro arthropods are also eating those guys and releasing those guys, and then they become food for someone too. They become food for earthworms, and that's where the food web comes in. It's like a food chain, but it's a food web because the predator and prey are multiple and they kind of jump around. It's not a linear food chain necessarily, but we are still on top of this thing. We are still on top of this food web, just like we are the food chain, in the fact that we're not going to get eaten by anybody. The dinosaurs aren't going to eat us. We are at the top of that web because of the decisions we make. So when we have all of those guys, we have the proper mix and diversity, and everything is right with the world down there. Once you do that, you've got soil. You no longer have dirt.
Spread the word on this, man. If this piques your interest at all, this is another guy's opinion, another guy's methodology. So why not subscribe and hit that little bell, because God knows all 2.5 of you that subscribe to this channel, you might not know when I put a new thing out, and we'll just go ahead and check you later.
Lawn creeps.